Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Vivian Hanrahan, and I'm the webinar coordinator for the HRB-TMRN webinar series. Welcome to everyone joining us today for the webinar, and we're especially delighted to welcome our guests today as presenters, Professor Mary Horgan and Dr. Jennifer Ralph-James. The webinar today is entitled Implementing a National Approach to Research Ethics Reviews During a Pandemic, the Irish Experience of NREC in COVID-19. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Professor Mary Horgan. So Professor Horgan is the President of the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland, the former Dean of the School of Medicine, UCC, and Consultant Physician in Infectious Diseases at Cork University Hospital. Professor Horgan has been in a ministerial appointment for a number of health service related national boards, including the HPRA. She sat on the governing body of the University College of Cork and was awarded the UCD Alumni Award for Health in 2019. She is appointed the chairperson of the newly established National Research Ethics Committee COVID-19 in April of this year. And Professor Horgan was also elected as the College of Physicians of Ireland, first ever woman to hold a position as the president of the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland since its foundation in 1654. So we're also extremely privileged to be in the company of Dr. Jennifer Ralph-James. She's the head of the newly established National Office of Research Ethics Committee, an independent statutory office hosted by the HRB. Jennifer's international career has spanned both public and private sectors, leading on health-related initiatives with the national reach, including programs for patient support and medical education, for health and research policy, research funding programs, and research investment decisions. She has held leadership roles managing the medical affairs of novel therapies in Ireland and Australia, and most recently was an associate director of MSD. Jennifer's remit has been to retain patient safety, dignity, and well-being at the centre of organisational decision-making. Jennifer's PhD from UCD was on neuroendocrine basis of rheumatic disease, and she's currently completing a higher diploma in psychotherapy studies at this St. Vincent's University Hospital. So two very busy ladies. So thank you for taking the time out to join us. Before I hand you over to both our speakers, I'd just like to turn your attention, everyone, to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So if you hover over the bottom toolbar, I'm sure everyone's very familiar with Zoom at this stage, but you'll see a little Q&A box. Tap into that, type in any question you may have throughout the presentation, and we can address those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our host. First off will be Jennifer. So Jennifer, could I just get you to unmute and join us?
Hi Vivian, can you hear me?
Hi. Okay, over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thanks so much Vivian for that kind introduction, and thanks to our colleagues at the HRB-TMRN for facilitating the webinar today. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you along with my NREC colleague, Prof Mary Horgan, about our experience of implementing the first national approach to research ethics review in Ireland. Vivian, I'm just trying to advance the slides.
Okay, so if you're
there we are. Pardon me. Sorry, guys. Yep.
Great.
So just to set the scene up front, Mary and I have reduced what we'll cover in the next 40 minutes or so to 6 key messages, which we hope you'll take away as insights into the importance of a national approach to research ethics review, both during a pandemic and into the future. I will touch on the importance of retaining high ethics standards in research, including a pandemic, despite the urgency and the challenges to do research. I'll discuss how Ireland's first REC, national REC, provided proof of principle of the value of a single national opinion. And finally, I hope to convince you today that the newly established National Office for Research Ethics Committees will bring cohesion, efficiency and transparency to research ethics review in Ireland. I'll let Mary speak to her learning points. Mary?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. There were a number of lessons, take-home messages that I, as chair of the committee and the committee, felt were important. The NREC COVID-19 is a critical component of the national coordinated response to COVID, and we really that's underpinned by the importance of research and innovation in a novel virus. Pandemic environment raises both the common and unique considerations for research. And what was key to what I believe is the success of the committee was the commitment, the collaboration, and the focus on a single topic. And we did learn on the fly because it was all done remotely. And you will see from the presentation further on the successful outcomes for the applications. So back to you, Jenny.
Great, thanks, Mary. So significantly, research is at the heart of the global response. So Ireland's first COVID case was reported in late February, and it is an important backdrop, I suppose, to our national response to COVID is the WHO research roadmap, which you see a screen grab of there. It's published in March, and research is clearly the backbone of the WHO response. And this is reflected in the two goals of the roadmap. Firstly, to integrate innovation into real-time diagnosis and treatment. And secondly, addressing those research priorities that will improve our preparedness for future pandemics. So really, it's ensuring that research is informing both the real-time action and future readiness into future health emergencies. It is a dense read, but the descriptors that permeate this roadmap in terms of research is that it needs to be prioritised, coordinated, accelerated and ethical. And ethics-associated actions in this WHO roadmap were amongst the first to be actioned back in February 2020, including a global recommendation of expedited evaluation and the provision of a WHO ethics guidance for COVID-19. So a report in 2020 from the Nuffield Council on Bioethics really represents the state of the art in this topic. So what should research ethics in an unprecedented environment such as a pandemic look like? And they identified a number of key ingredients, that the ethical review should be independent. This is an important safeguard for research participants, obviously, and that the standard of review should not be compromised in any way. Processes, however, to achieve that scrutiny can and should be adapted as necessary, including scope for expediting applications with flexible means of communication and deliberation where necessary. So research in an emergency setting can raise both common and unique ethics issues, and Mary will talk a little bit to that later. But some RECs during a pandemic will be faced with whether the proposed consent processes are appropriate and the most sensitive possible that can be achieved in circumstances, including for vulnerable groups. Conversely, are vulnerable groups being unjustifiably excluded? And importantly, what plans are in place to expedite the dissemination of data so that it can inform the research response? And at a practical level, this report underscores the importance of national support and resourcing for national ethics committees. One of the earliest actions from the WHO, as I mentioned earlier, was the publication of REC guidance for rapid review during a pandemic. Most of the recommendations you'll see here were leveraged by the NREC COVID, including virtual review meetings, electronic submissions, a process for rapid review and responses from the researcher. All for accelerated and simplified review by RECs was echoed by EUREC, who's the European representative body for national research ethics committees, which reassuringly for us made recommendations very similar to the WHO. We're all very familiar with NPHET now as the dedicated governance structure to ensure a public health-led whole of society approach to the national response. And NPHET comprises 10 expert subgroups, and notably for research, these include the research subgroup and the pandemic ethics advisory group. And given that NPHET provides the national direction and expert advice on the strategy to contain COVID in Ireland, it's imperative and reassuring, I think, that our country's approach relies largely on research and evidence to support immediate decision-making. And upfront and centre in the National Action Plan is an emphasis on research and a call to action that ethics approval needs to happen quickly. So while scientific data from such research plays a crucial role in mitigating mortality during a pandemic, ethical principles also must drive decision-making. Pandemic Ethics Subgroup led delivery of this document and the Ethical Framework for Decision-Making in a Pandemic, which is an important resource tailored to the Irish environment from which decision makers in our community can draw, including for the research context. They identify 7 principles for shared basis for decisions, and they highlight fairness, reciprocity, and privacy as the most relevant in the research context. And I should say these were top of mind in the operations, the deliberations of the NREC COVID. Specifically, this document made a call for a mechanism to allow accelerated review of research without any compromise in standards. So it's fair to say, I think, that the existing REC system in Ireland is not poised to meet this brief. And the existing system overall, estimated at up to 80 or so local or institutional RECs, is largely uncoordinated, despite the work of the 12 recognised RECs, which are recognised to review clinical trials. Certainly, there's a lot of things going for the existing system, and there is enthusiasm by the people that drive the system. There's a wealth of expertise and commitment there. There is an appetite for change, and there's a desire to formalise a network to support the development of knowledge and expertise. And that they do manage a notable application volume. And we know that most RECs review up to 50 submissions per year, and some have a fast track mechanism. So we heard a few weeks back on a similar webinar from Rachel Crowley from St. Vincent's University Hospital REC, who spoke about their expedited approach during COVID. However, there isn't largely a governance structure, and this from international standards brings into question accountability, standards and consistency. And they are operating with a local lens, so it's a local opinion, it's not a single national opinion. And while we do have the recognised RECs approved for clinical trials, in reality, this hasn't translated into the efficiency needed, and importantly for translation to research beyond what's done in clinical trials. Most frequently, RECs aren't totally independent and are organised by an institution that I suppose has a stake in the research proposals that will be reviewed. There's a lack of standardisation, which can be a hurdle for applicants. So estimates suggest that only 2/3 of local RECs are using a standing operated procedure. Resourcing is a major challenge for our local REC colleagues as well. Many rely on voluntary support in this capacity. And in terms of the processes, at a very practical level, many don't accept electronic submissions, and this won't really support expedited review. And in terms of process, I think the average time is around a month and can be up to 3 months for approvals from local RECs. I should say colleagues in the HSE-led REC Reform Working Group, led by Anna Therese in the HSE, are making efforts to improve the system at a local level. The NREC COVID-19 was established in early April 2020 to accelerate Irish COVID-19 health research. And it's an important component of the national emergency response to COVID. And importantly, it's in line with the WHO roadmap for R&D, established by the Minister for Health, to accelerate research while maintaining international best practice standards. It's supported by the small team at the National Office. An important feature of this process was coordination with other bodies involved in the regulation of health research. So the HRCDC and the HPRA, for those applications that required a consent declaration or required regulatory approval. It was chaired by Professor Mary Horgan, and she chaired a committee membership of 19 that covered really a diversity of expertise, skills and experience, including non-expert members and PPI representatives. And critically for this process, this committee was mandated to provide a single national opinion for COVID-19 health research. One aspect in terms of getting the NREC COVID off the ground, one aspect that I'm particularly proud of is the cross-body collaboration. And I think it really is a fantastic example of what can be done in challenging circumstances with a shared objective and unwavering focus. And importantly, that the people involved from these organisations are actually enabled to do that. In terms of setup and operations, there are a number of very real challenges we had to navigate, mitigate, or overcome. Up front and centre, I suppose there's multiple stakeholders involved in health research. They're all very well established in their own right, with their own processes and procedures. And we were, I suppose, in effect, catapulted together to deliver on an ambitious task. And we really dealt with that by emphasising the shared objective. There was certainly pragmatic collaboration. And really there's a needs must attitude. And there was plenty of nice to haves that we identified along the way. But in terms of getting the process up and running quickly to meet the research community needs, we really focused on the priorities. The urgency, obviously, of the current environment is very clear. Research was clearly needed to combat the pandemic, but the emergency environment itself is an impediment to research and an impediment to those of us working in health research regulation. So we, I suppose, countered this by dedicated resourcing and, as I said, as I alluded to earlier, ruthless, what I refer to as ruthless prioritisation. The public health restrictions were also something we had to overcome. We aligned with many of the WHO recommendations. We spent a lot of time at setup and the time available, which I suppose wasn't a lot, but we spent a lot of time on the application form for the electronic submission. At a practical level, we had virtual meetings with agreed ways of working, which really I think would have been uncommon for this number of people meeting weekly. We also had a secure online reading room, which avoided paper use and ensured confidentiality. We were a new national office, which was a challenge. So we're a new entity really in the research environment. So identifying our key stakeholders very quickly was key. Transparency is something that the office and the committee are committed to, and we've demonstrated this in a number of ways, including proactive communication and promptly publishing our minutes online. Importantly for the process was our proactive partnership, particularly with our local REC colleagues. And in terms of what this looked like, there was a regular communication from myself on behalf of the committee of sharing, in terms of sharing info on the committee's decisions and operations. Further to this, we were fortunate to have a local REC representative to act in a liaison capacity between the NREC and the local RECs, which worked really well. And I suppose, as with anything like this, there were many unknowns and several unknown unknowns, but we were committed to review the process frequently and to take on board constructive feedback. And really, we built in agility into the process to enable us to respond and the process to respond to change. So this graphic represents the expedited review process for the NREC COVID-19. As you can see, over about 7 to 8 days, we did run a tight ship, and there was an expedited process on all sides in terms of the committee, the national office staff, and in terms of researchers responding to queries. So for an application to be considered on a Wednesday afternoon, it would have had to have been submitted the prior Wednesday, no later than midday, for consideration the following week. And at the first stage, really at the submission process, there was a vigorous validation, and this was really essential, so that only reviewable applications take up a slot at the committee's agenda, which was limited. And our programme manager, Aileen, really did spend a lot of time corresponding with applicants to improve their applications in advance of consideration by the committee. In terms of the review stage, it really was an expedited review process, with committee members essentially reviewing a large number of applications every weekend, I think up to for 16 weeks, 16 meetings we had. And there was a pragmatic approach, I think, to dividing up the responsibilities. They worked in review teams and made efforts to share comments in advance of the meeting. In terms of the NREC meeting, as I mentioned, it was virtual. We had more than a quorum at every meeting, which is, I think, testament to the engagement of the committee. And as is best practice, decisions were arrived at by consensus. And in terms of decisions, most applications received an outcome within 24 to 48 hours of the committee meeting. And as I mentioned earlier, we posted our minutes online shortly after approval. to summarise from an operational perspective, there are several cogs to the NREC wheel, I think, that kept it moving and ultimately enabled the committee and the National Office to deliver on its brief. And many of these are reflected in other models internationally. So obviously at the very top of the pile there is the robust ethics review, so there was no compromise in standards, the adapted ways of working, and the dedicated operational support is essentially two full-time scientific staff in the National Office supporting the committee. The process was very much coordinated with our colleagues in the HRCDC and the HPRA. A key feature and I suppose non-negotiable of the process was that the opinion of the NREC had to be respected nationally. We worked to have our local RECs as partners. We worked transparently, as I mentioned earlier, and really it was the commitment and engagement of the members that kept the process really moving. It's important, I think, before I hand over to Mary, to acknowledge and mention the other aspects of the national coordinated response that really expedited and enabled research, from dedicated, quickly mobilised funding to reliable fact checkers for health research, to government sponsorship of Ireland's participation in the WHO Solidarity Trial, which I understand is already starting to recruit. So just moving on to, I suppose, the National Office as an entity itself. The past 5 months, I think, have been a most unusual introduction for the National Office to the Irish system. And while the NREC COVID was I think an important first order of business for the Office, it's really critical to understand that the Office is part of a longer term strategic plan to transform research ethics review nationally. So we were established essentially when I started in May this year. We're a statutory independent office hosted by the Health Research Board. And I think this is a really fortunate choice for us. We get to leverage the expertise and the reputation and the operational support of the HRB. And ultimately, our remit is to embed a robust, transparent and cohesive research ethics review system that strengthens the national research infrastructure. And really the modernisation of research ethics across the Irish system will be achieved through a twin track legislative approach. And the first being the National Research Ethics Committee Bill, which was, the bill was passed there last year, and the imminent EU clinical trial regulation which was, I suppose, drafted in 2014, and we're waiting for that to come into effect. So NRECs will be assembled in prescribed areas of health research over time by myself, the head of the National Office, on approval by the Minister for Health. And it'll be no surprise to most that the priority NREC will be for clinical trials of investigational medicinal products. As with the NREC COVID, all NRECs will be enabled to provide a single national opinion on applications made to them via the National Office. And in terms of what's occupying a lot of our time at the moment is that we're working with the Department of Health and the HPRA on a roadmap for transformation to this new ethics review system in Ireland. It was a new public office with a distinct remit described in the bill I mentioned earlier. It's imperative that the National Office define its own vision, mission and strategic priorities. And we've begun to put a bit of shape on this, and it's captured in this graphic. And I'd suggest that it is ambitious, but I think it's realistic and achievable over time. And at the top there, we've articulated our vision, and it is that Ireland's system of research ethics review cultivates the benefits of health research for patients and the public. And I think that word cultivates is very important. And so it's not just ad hoc, piecemeal trickling down of benefits to the patients and the public, that Ireland is really maximising and capitalising on its ability to conduct clinical research, particularly late stage clinical trials. In terms of the mission of the National Office, how we will enable our vision is that we will embed a robust and cohesive research ethics review system to strengthen the research infrastructure. And we've coined 5 strategic priorities. Firstly, to deliver this cohesive new transparent system to provide timely ethics review. Secondly, to partner with health research stakeholders with the shared objective of ensuring that Ireland's ethics review framework is really poised and are ready to adapt international best practice and change. Thirdly, to engage with the Research Ethics Committee's community, researchers and the wider public to facilitate education on ethical decision making across the board. And this is an aspect of the National Office's remit that I'm particularly excited about, and just our ability to kind of elicit, I suppose, a ripple effect in terms of ethical decision making and improving standards and outreach. Fourthly, to be a thought leader in the research ethics arena by seeding discussion, advancing debate, and providing trusted information. And finally, as a new public office, our ambition is to be an agile and trusted office in national public service. So before I pass over to Mary, I just want to plug for a couple of exciting career opportunities at the National Office. We are looking for a product officer and a communications officer, and the deadline is early next week. So if you or anyone in your network are interested, please do reach out. Million. So I will pass over to Mary.
Thanks very much, Jenny, and thanks again to Vivian for having us speak at your webinars and really share our experience with you. Jenny has control of the slides, so I will be saying next slide. Firstly, the NREC I chaired it along with my two vice chairs, Professor Hannah McGee and Professor Anthony Staines. But you can see the number of people, all of whom had a huge contribution to make at each of the meetings. As Jenny pointed out, there were 16 meetings over a 4-month period. It was really busy, and these are busy people, but everyone had a shared goal, and really this was in the national interest at the time. So what I'm going to present is really sharing the experience of all of us as a committee rather than just me as a chair. Next slide. So the NREC, the ways of working, was chairing and managing a diverse group, some of whom I knew from clinical practice or from the university, but many I didn't know. People were unknown to each other, and this was all virtual. People were from different backgrounds, and that ensured equal share of voice during the meetings and really a focus on the task at hand, which was ethics rather than an in-depth review of science. The excellent committee attendance week to week really was a reflection of the engagement the committee had to the government's initiative on research and ethical review of same. Was very responsive and really was a big time commitment, which really isn't sustainable long term. You'll appreciate 16 meetings for busy people over a 4-month period was a huge commitment. We really had the aim of being consistent on the feedback where possible, and a proactive sharing of alignment on complex issues such as capacity to consent. Next slide. There were practicalities. There was 19 committee members, and given the number of reviews we had to do, I made a pragmatic decision at the beginning is to have review teams. So we had 4 review teams, which reflected the skill set of the committees. So we had virtual meetings once a week. We all agreed on the time, and as Jenny said, the commitment, the quorum was more than reached all of the time, which showed the commitment of the group. There was real-time engagement with applicants with an expedited approach on both sides. So, you know, there was really buy-in from those applicants that if you wanted it done quickly, then all the paperwork needed to be done, and the support that Jenny and Aileen gave to the applicants will help to guide this. There was a pragmatic approach to review of responses and minutes. So once the letter went out, came back in, the committee members were really responsive to the request that Jenny oversaw. Obviously, minutes of meetings are really important. These were posted on a weekly basis, really reflecting the transparency, but also the accountability that the committee had. There were transparent timelines for the committee and the applications, which were invariably met. Next slide. So when it comes to ethics principles, there was unprecedented time and need for research and still is. However, the requirement for unwavering ethics standards remains unchanged. There's the Declaration of Helsinki, which is the long-standing cornerstone of ethics review, the Department of Health Ethics Framework document, which was timely guidance in this area, and Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan led out on this, and I'll speak about Siobhan a little later because she was fantastic during this time. The EMA guidance on the management of clinical trials during the COVID pandemic, and particular considerations during pandemic, example such as scarce resources, the logistics of in-person consent, and over research cohort. And you'll all have had seen the experiences of a number of key papers being retracted, which is something we were very mindful of, that we really upheld all ethical principles and ensured the safety of participants as the researchers did too. Next slide. So this is a fantastic infographic that Aileen and Jenny did. So essentially, there were 93 applications considered, 83 received provisional approval. As of now, there was 71 approvals with 4 declines. The research categorization is there. You can see it varies from cancer to infection to neurology, mental health, dermatology. So quite a range. So it was things outside infection too. And the research activity, everything from etiology of disease to diagnostic disease management, health services, prevention, treatment evaluation, and the structures underpinning all of these. The gender breakdown, females slightly more at 49 compared to the 44 male lead researchers on each application. There were 61 institutions submitted from 20 counties, and a quarter of the projects had an international component. Next slide. I'm just picking 3 random projects that I think were just noted the breadth of what we were seeing. One is from Dr. Sarah Gibney. It was health literacy in Ireland from the Department of Health, and it was a national survey on what really is an important area in research and our understanding of health literacy, as it's a gateway for improving the health of the population. So this project was measuring the health literacy and a vital starting point for identifying groups who need support to improve their literacy. And this research project will survey people aged 18 and older in Ireland about their health literacy during the pandemic, and will feed into HLS-19 project, which is a comparative European survey of population health literacy, and really highlighting the importance of cross-country collaboration in research. Next slide. This is an area that's particularly dear to my heart. It's the genetics of mortality in critical care by the lead researcher here is Professor Alistair Nicholl in St. Vincent's University Hospital. And this is a prospective observational multi-site international study. And it's essentially looking at why some people do tend to become critically ill despite mild illness. We see this in many infections, many other cases of sepsis, where an apparent normal host all of a sudden deteriorates quickly. And I strongly believe that this infection will be a means of getting a better understanding of the subtleties that cause people to deteriorate much more than others, and really an understanding of how that happens and how we can support the development of future treatments. And the last, next slide, the last project I'm just going to allude to is one that most of you will be familiar with, which is SCOPI, the study to investigate COVID-19 infection in Ireland. Lead researcher here is Dr. Derval Igo. The institution is HSE HPSC, and it's prospective cross-sectional and multi-site studies essentially looking at zero prevalence of coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 in the Irish population, starting with the counties of Dublin and Sligo, really giving us an idea of asymptomatic infection, the infection occurrence in the Irish population, transmission within the community, and may be able to predict the effect of public health actions and programs on future disease spread, as well as our better knowledge on vaccination and who to vaccinate. Next slide. So the frequent ethical issues, and I think this is particularly relevant for forward planning for future research applications, is really looking at the quality of the participants' materials from the outset. The informed consent process was an area that required frequent attention. The management of data sharing, both internationally and also cross-institutionally, something that really can be addressed fairly practically based on our experience. The plans to disseminate outcomes, the security and use of online survey tools, the unjustified exclusion of vulnerable groups. And this is particularly important with the pandemic because, as we all well know, vulnerable groups were more at risk of having poor outcomes or hospital admissions. And it's really important that that particular group is included in studies in this pandemic and perhaps many other areas of research that we look at. The recruitment approaches, just to flag, you know, we saw potential risks of coercion and power relationships, and the duplicity of or misinformed research efforts. And what we did here was a frequently asked questions were developed, and indeed Aileen and Jenny and the staff really did a good job in trying to answer the groups as much as possible. Next slide. So what worked well? Well, the diverse membership and perspectives, and we were fortunate enough to really have a very experienced group on committee. The engagement of members was outstanding, and their responsiveness was second to none. I suppose I was chair, and anyone who knows me, I'm fairly pragmatic and decisive, and we move on to the next item agenda, and that worked really well in managing the committees. It was made easier by Jenny, preparedness for meetings, but also with the experienced committee. The meeting structure opinions were heard equally, and the division of labour, as I said, we had review teams where we had 4 teams with expertise across all the domains required. We had operational support, and Jenny outlined this. We had IT tools, again, all of which were organised remotely. And we had openness and transparency around the whole process, which to me is absolutely key to the success of future NRECs. Next slide. What could be improved upon? Well, a pre-review for scientific merit, to restrict NREC work to larger studies. And certainly at the start of this, I had met with the VPs of research across many of the universities on the island, and really pushing cross-institutional collaboration, but also international collaboration, really making our mark internationally when it comes to research. Refresher education for members, and the IT tools. They were good, but I'm sure with more virtual meetings, these will be improved further. And really the workflow couldn't be sustainable having that 93 applications, 16 meetings over a 4-month period was a huge amount of work. Next slide. So just, we did seek feedback as chair, and Jennifer and I sought feedback. Why did they accept it? Why were they so engaged? And these are some of the commentaries: delighted to accept and make a contribution to how our country was responding. A lot of brain power and goodwill together on Wednesday afternoons. National imperative to rapidly enable Irish research. Inform practice and policy, ensure that there was no compromise to ethical review or scrutiny, and we're all in this together. And they're just a flavour of the feedback we got from the committee members. Next slide. So looking towards the future, for the NREC COVID-19, a subcommittee continues to sit for oversight and related responsibilities of those studies that are underway. The local REC engagement, I think, is really key. Who does what does a national committee do, what does local RECs do, and really a shared response and understanding of where national starts and stops, and likewise with local. So really an openness and communication engagement at national and local level, and really to continue to share the lessons learned as we're doing today. And from a national office point of view, the research community and stakeholder engagement, roadmap of transformation to national research ethics review is really key. And the legislation of this is pending, and I would encourage you as researchers to really lobby to get this legislation through, so that future NRECs will happen sooner rather than later. Next slide. And finally, just to acknowledge, obviously, my colleagues on NREC. The Department of Health, Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan, really was instrumental on expediting the formation of the committee. So just to acknowledge her, and Siobhan and Dr. Teresa Maguire were really great sounding boards at the outset and at any time we needed them, along with Peter Lennon in the department. The national office, obviously Jennifer, who you've met virtually there, Aileen Sheehy, who was fantastic, Kathy Kelly, given that I only met Jenny for the first time in person. Finally, we had a sandwich together last Wednesday. The HPRA, Gráinne Power, and my good friend and colleague, Dr. Elaine Breslin. The HRCDC, who were really engaged from the outset, and we had a number of meetings with Bridget McManus, Emily Veriker, and Johnny Barrett. HRB, Dr. Murray O'Driscoll, Gillian Markey, and Liam Sinnott. The HSE, Research and Development, and finally the local RECs, the Bowman ethics staff. And just to point out the fantastic work that Dr. Sive O'Neill, who is based in Tala and St. James's, helped us with that engagement piece with the local RECs. So that completes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mary and Jenny. That was really, really helpful. I think it's very interesting, and what was particularly helpful for me looking was the slide on the strategic priorities of the group. I think that was very helpful, and the infographics, very good at explaining the structure. And we've had lots of questions. If anyone else has more questions, please do type them into the Q&A box. I'm going to make a start. Hopefully we'll get through them all. So one of the first questions we had was, This is a temporary streamlined process which allows for coordinated review by both the NREC and the HRCDC. How many of the COVID applications required review by both committees?
I can answer that if you like, Mary. So in terms of the 93 applications that we received, about a fifth require consideration by the HRCDC. But I should say many more applications require discussion and guidance from both the National Office and the Secretariat of the HRCDC in advance of an application, really to determine if a consent declaration was required. It's, as many people appreciate, it's a complicated process to understand and isn't always readily obvious. So about a fifth.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question now. So, one moment, sorry about this. Okay, so this question then came in from Verena, and she's asking, Jennifer, you mentioned that the IMP studies will be prioritised. Is there a plan to put in place a central REC opinion for non-IMP IMP studies as well?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. And obviously there's lots of areas in health research that are deserving and in need of an expedited process and a single national opinion. You'd appreciate the priority will be for clinical trials of investigational medicinal products. Those next of the rank, if you like, will be the other areas in addition to CTIMPs that we have a legislative obligation. Top of mind would be medical devices, perhaps in vitro human reproduction, and even you could envisage a genomics NREC down the track. But it will take time, and it won't just be my decision, I can assure you. But our bread and butter at the moment really is preparing and getting our ducks in a row in terms of NREC for CTIMPs and possibly medical devices.
Very good, okay. And then maybe slightly related to that, there's another question. It says, clearly the national approach to research ethics will be essential for the EU clinical trial regulation. Do we know when the new regulation will be effective?
Yeah, again, good question. So the EU CTR has been anticipated for a number of years now. Its delay, I understand, is due to technical challenges, which I think we can all appreciate in recent months. So technical challenges with the CTIS, which is the new online pan-European portal through which research applications will be submitted for clinical trials. So this CTIS, so this information system, is proving, I think, to represent both the innovation and the delay. So it is significant to predict exactly, but estimates, I think, predict mid to late 2021. So towards, I'd say, the end of next year.
Okay, very good. And there's another question, and it's relating to similar about the structure of the NREC. And it's like, how is it, this is from Adele, and she's asking, how is it envisioned that your office and committee will interact with existing recognised ethics committees under the 2004 legislation, particularly with regard to industry-led IMP clinical trials? So again, same kind of area. Will you act as a supervisory body, and will the new NREC be responsible for reviewing all submissions?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot in there. So just Adele's first question. So really in terms of how future NRECs will work with local RECs, there is a mixed model provided for in the bill that I mentioned earlier, whereby national RECs will work in the system alongside local RECs. But importantly, the NRECs will have a very defined remit with a mandate from the Minister for Health to provide decisions that are, I suppose, that are to be respected nationally. So I suppose the experience of NREC COVID-19 really demonstrates that the communication, the transparency and the partnership piece will be really essential between NRECs and local RECs to ensure the highest standards of review, I suppose, across the system. But really, I suppose, just to be upfront, I suppose when all this legislation is in place, reviews for clinical trials, reviews for CTIMPs will be directed through this NREC.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, and then another question with regards to amendments. Let's get this right. Where are we? Sorry, it's just gone on the screen. Oh, there we are. Just what will happen if the NREC for COVID-19 is a temporary measure? So what happens if one of the NREC approvals requires ethics review for an amendment to the research application?
Yeah, again, good question. So Mary mentioned earlier the subcommittee. So the NREC COVID-19 was certainly a success, but it was definitely a temporary measure. So the subcommittee, so Mary and the two vice chairs have agreed to continue to sit in a standing subcommittee, and they'll meet, I suppose, the oversight responsibilities for this research approved by the NREC COVID-19, including amendments. So there's a process underpinning that, and they will review amendments not every week, I should say, but periodically for those studies that require it. And if needed, Mary, as chair, can co-opt other members if she needs for this purpose. So there is a process in place for that.
Okay, that's good. It's reassuring. And we've had a couple of questions then on the IT side of things. So I'll just sort of put them together. A question about what tools did you use from an IT point of view, and what virtual meeting platform did you use, and were there any benefits or drawbacks to those that you've experienced?
Sure, yeah. So I'll give my tuppence worth, and Mary can share her experience in terms of a first-hand user of the tools. So I should say we had great IT support from our HRB colleagues. We went with Microsoft Teams, and by and large it worked well. We did have, and maybe other people find this, we did have the existence of a waiting room that we couldn't get people out of occasionally, but we navigated those little challenges. But by and large, it went really well. We had almost like an etiquette, like an agreed ways of working. You know, if people wanted to speak, they'd kind of just flag it on the messenger that was associated with Teams. The other thing that was really useful was the online secure reading room that we used, and the one we used was one called Decision Time, and I know other boards and other large committees in Ireland and elsewhere use this platform. It worked really well. It was a secure, security and confidentiality are obviously top of mind at research ethics review, but it worked well. And that's
I can come in from just a user's point of view. I suppose we all started getting more used to doing virtual meetings. Microsoft Teams worked. In the beginning, I think it's important just to ensure that there's the meeting etiquette and that there is maybe some IT support or somebody who's knowledgeable in it but I think we're in a different place now than we were 6 months ago. And secondly, the decision time worked well. In the beginning, again, we needed a bit of additional IT supervision, and we got a very short tutorial, about 15 minutes on use of decision time, and really everything went smoothly thereafter.
Mm-hmm. And with regards to making the submission, we've had a question in that line. And so did you achieve electronic submissions with a receipt to the RECs, or was it through an email? And if so, how were they submitted? Was it a Word document or a PDF or some specific format?
Yeah, so a lot. So Aileen Sheehy, the program manager in the national office, led on development of the application form for the NREC COVID-19, and because it was a coordinated process with the HRCDC, it was, I think, to some a little bit lengthy, but it was necessary, I think, to capture all the information needed for both committees. It started off as a Word document, and then we got some nice creative people to make it into a PDF. So I think people really appreciated being able to submit it online. And we've a fantastic admin assistant, Kathy Kelly, who spent a lot of the past few months acknowledging physically acknowledging the receipt of the applications and issuing numbers. So all very process-oriented actions, but very important to ensure, I suppose, the accurate and timely information flow through the office.
Yeah, helpful. And I'm just going to, we've had another question. Let me just come to it. See, yeah, we've had a question then from somebody else, Francis, who has an issue with how a hospital has dealt with a particular query that they had. I think it's probably specific cases, so I might give that to you to come back to separately, if that's okay.
Yes, very happy to correspond.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I think that's all the questions. I've kind of put some of them in together there because they were similar. There was a lot of sort of queries about how the future NREC will work with local REC. So that seems to be an issue that you've addressed as well there. So thanks very much for that. So I think that kind of, if anyone else has any more questions, if you just type them in, I can ask them now, or we'll draw it to a close. Okay, oh, here's one here now. It's just somebody come in. So do you have any concerns about the potential volume of submissions, the turnaround time for opinions, and the potential impact, positive or negative, on Ireland's attractiveness to international sponsors?
I'll just make one comment on that before Jenny comes in. I strongly believe that resourcing of research, including research ethics office, is really, really important if we want to be players in the international field. And it is about recognizing the importance of research and innovation in ensuring that Ireland is on the global stage and that we are able to engage with internationally in trials of all type. So it does come down to resourcing and an appreciation of why research is important.
And Jenny?
Yeah, no, that's a really pertinent question. I suppose just there's a number of European developments which is inadvertently highlighting Ireland and Ireland's position as hopefully a great place to do research. Obviously post-Brexit, Ireland will hold what I think is a unique position as an English-speaking country in the EU. We're a member of ECRIN, which is an important clinical research network in Europe. We have membership of that since 2018, and really we need to enable ourselves really to fully leverage this membership and to be a fully active participant in clinical research on a European stage, so that we're top of mind when people are considering where to test their innovative medicines, where to test clinical, undertake their clinical trials, and particularly the late stage ones. So I think combined with the work of the National Office and colleagues in other health research regulatory agencies, that the research infrastructure will be changed and make Ireland, I suppose, a more attractive place. So yeah, we'll rely on the community's support to achieve that. So.
And when do you envision that this will really become active, that the NREC will be taking applications outside of COVID and going forward? Is it?
Yeah, so a lot of the timing, not to handball it, but some of the timing is beyond my personal control, as you can imagine, but it'll rely on local legislation, so national legislation, which, in all likelihood will probably be next year by the time the NREC bill is passed. But I do know that there's a lot of support within the Department of Health to get this over the line. And then the EU CTR I mentioned, I think the creases have been ironed out in most of the EU CTR. It's just the CTIS, so the information system, that they're sorting out in terms of its technicalities. But yeah, probably not a very definite answer, but hopefully things will start to happen next year.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Listen, thank you so much, both of you, because it's been really good and really informative, and there's lots to go away and think about now with our ethics submissions in the future. So thank you so much. I would like to just say to everyone attending, also thank you very much for joining us. And just to give you a couple of dates for your diary, just reminders that we're having another webinar actually this coming Tuesday, the 9th of September at 12 noon with Dr. Barbara Klein from the RCSI, and she will be presenting her webinar on the quality scope and reporting standards of randomized controlled trials in Irish health research. And also we, the TMRN, are holding our 6th annual symposium, and that is going obviously online this year, and that will be October the 14th and 15th. So we're really delighted to welcome some of the world's leading experts in trial methodology. And this year's theme will be improving trials for better health decisions in informed public. So all that's left to say now is thank you to everyone for joining us, to our excellent presenters, and I hope that we'll be able to have you soon again for our next webinar. So thank you and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Best of luck.
Thanks,
Bye.
Vivian. Thanks, Mary.
Bye-bye.